Well, I think my computer knows it's towards the end of the semester. I've had an unusually hard time getting each of these to properly record without breaking. So we left off on business logic, and we said that business logic sits between UI logic and data logic. Business logic is what turns data into information, and then what makes that information available to the UI screen. So the next layer is going to be the data or persistence logic. This is how we save data to the local database onto the phone. This is also how we will interact with data on the plantedplaces.com website or whatever website we might use. So data or persistence is how we interact, how we read data from an external source or an internal source, and how we write data to an external or internal source. Many times our applications will provide value by integrating data from different sources. The source might be hardware of the phone itself, like the GPS, the accelerometer, the photo, or data from other areas like a public web service or website, or data that we've stored on the phone previously. And a good example of this, again, is color match, because we are taking a photo with the onboard camera and we're mixing that with color data from plantedplaces.com, and we're providing the user with information by combining data from two different sources: the color that the user has captured with the camera and the database of plants with colors on plantedplaces.com. So that's how we many times can make information, by aggregating two pieces of data together. So again, on the Plant Places URL, we'll see that this DAO package has things like network DAO, which is specifically meant for interacting with the Plant Places website. Okay, and also the plant service, or the plant DAO. Actually, that's the wrong one. Let me go to the online plant DAO. This is meant for interacting with the plantedplaces.com online. So we see that what it's doing is it's hitting a URL, and it's finding data about plants by going to the plantedplaces.com website via this URL. On the other hand, the offline DAO is interacting with the local database using what we would call database calls. Okay, so the data layer, the persistence layer, is interacting with data. That might be local data, which is on board the phone, or remote data, which is accessible over a website. Okay, physical storage would be something like the onboard database itself or the phone data. So these many times, when we're talking about data, we're talking about accessing physical storage somewhere. So online database, internet connected data, or phone provided data. And like I said, the real magic is being able to find where you can mix data together to create information. Next step is we want to consider integration with other activities via intents and with libraries. So we don't want to reinvent camera software every time we want to use the phone's camera. What's easier to do is just tell the phone that we want to take a picture and let the phone decide the best way to do that. Many times the phone will hand that off to a user. So if you're ever in an app and you trigger a camera and it comes up with a prompt and asks you how you want to complete this action, that's what we would call an intent. The software is calling into a service and just saying, hey, I want to take a picture. Either use your preferred mechanism for taking pictures, or ask the user, say, user, how would you like to take this picture? Finally, we're going to want to integrate with libraries as well. So one very frequently used library is the, I have two here in Plant Places Mobile, for instance. Google Play Services, which provides me with maps, and Google AdMob, which provides with ads. So a lot of times we'll bring in third-party libraries because they will provide some benefit to us. So maps, so you can have interactive maps, and also ads, so you can generate ad revenue. So those are examples of third-party services which we would have on Android. On Cordova or on Windows with Cordova, let's see if I can, 1 second as I bring this back over. what we will oftentimes integrate with our JavaScript libraries. So let me go ahead and stop the debugger here. And what we'll do is we'll bring in things like jQuery Mobile, which is a JavaScript library which helps us do interaction, real-time interaction. And also Cordova itself is a JavaScript library. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time we draw a new app. So for those times when we want to share things we've done before, or maybe share things that other people have produced, a lot of times we'll bring in a JavaScript library like this in Cordova, and that will have a set of pre-existing functions that we can reuse. So, layers of an application. The main layers that we usually think about are the presentation layer, which is the look and feel, the user interface layer, which decides what happens when a user clicks a button, the business logic layer, which combines data to generate information, the persistence layer, which gathers information, the physical storage, which is where that information lives, and then integration with other apps. So initially I'd planned on cutting off this first recording at this point, but that recording took several different tries to get it all through. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next section, which is object-oriented terms, object-oriented programming terms. Most modern programming languages are either object-oriented or object-based, and this is a bit tricky to understand to start with, but what we can do is we can relate these to the English language. So a class is like a noun, a method is like a verb, an attribute is like an adjective. Okay, examples. Okay, each of these are examples of classes, and some of these we've looked at already. A plant, a user, a search activity, or in other words, the Java logic that goes behind a presentation layer. A plant service, that's what does our online-offline toggle so that the user has a seamless experience whether the phone is connected to a network or not. And then the online plant DAO, which does our data access. Okay, so each of these are classes. If we look back in Eclipse here, our development environment, each of the things that we see listed here under source, all of these things are classes. Each is a different file. Each has its programming logic. So if you take a look at this, these are all of the classes that are used to create the Plant Places mobile app. Just take a quick count here. Several dozen, isn't it? It's several dozen unique files that have to come together, each of these handwritten. So there's a lot of work here. There's quite a bit of work here that goes into making a mobile app. A lot of times people underestimate that. They think, well, I want to write I want a mobile app that's going to compare prices or do this or use QR codes. A lot of people underestimate the amount of work that actually is going to go into a mobile app. So com.plantplaces, this is all the user interface logic. These are all classes that decide what's going to happen when a user clicks a button. com.plantplaces.dao, these are all persistence logic or data logic classes. These are all things that are accessing some type of data. And you can see a naming convention here. Most of the user interface classes end with activity. Most of the data classes end with DAO or data access object. Next we have DTOs, data transfer objects, which represents real nouns that a user would interact with. A plant, a location, a user. These are nouns that make a lot of sense to a user. And then finally, service would be the business logic. Okay, so a lot of different classes are involved here, but usually the classes represent nouns in the English language. Next, we have methods. Methods are verbs, things that can happen. Search, click, show colors. These are methods. Attributes are adjectives. They describe a noun. A car is brown, 1995 Chevrolet. A plant is a Cercis canadensis, that's the genus and species. Common name is a redbud. User is a 22-year-old Cincinnati male. So an attribute is something that describes a noun. Okay? Attributes have to have data types. Computers internally store everything as a set of zeros and ones. Those zeros and ones can be mapped to numbers, like numbers that we know, the decimal system, the 10-base system. And then those numbers can be further mapped to letters, other numbers, or sounds, or anything like that. But the data type is what tells us how to map those numbers to sounds. So let's look at an example of a class. Okay? If we look at a plant, plant is a noun. Okay, let's see what's inside of this. Here are our attributes. An ID, which is a long, which is a type of number. A plant identifier, so those are both identifiers. Family, genus, species, cultivar, common, and category. Those are all things that can describe a plant. So those are adjectives. And they're all strings. Okay, they're words, basically. Alphanumeric. Boolean means yes or no, a 1 or a 0. Is it recommended? That's a true or a false. Is this a recommended plant? Is it a native plant? There's another thing that's a true or a false. Yes, it's native, or no, it's not. Is it edible? That's a true or a false. So again, that's a Boolean. So we've seen 3 categories of data types here. Int and long, which is a number. String, which is text. And then Boolean, which is a true or a false. Then we have things like availability, deep shade, deer resistance, so on and so forth. These are floats. That's another number type. Unlike an int, a float can have a decimal value. So an int is a whole number, where a float can have a decimal value. Okay, bloom date. So bloom date, plant ID, begin month, begin year, end year, so on and so forth. So another noun with adjectives that describe it. Noun is a bloom date. The adjectives are what is the end month of the bloom date? When does it stop blooming? What's the end day? When does it stop blooming? So on and so forth. User, again, we have a user, which is a noun, and then attributes that describe a user are the adjectives or the attributes of the class. Email, company, URL, username, password, prefix, first name, last name, phone number, so on and so forth. And then the methods are verbs. So class is a noun. Adjectives are attributes, which are these variables here. Attributes or adjectives have data type. And then methods are verbs. And that's what makes up the source code of the program. So when we look on the left here, we see a lot of these different classes that are involved in making something like a mobile application. Plus then we have the other assets which are involved, which are things like the layout that we looked at before, and the images that we looked at before. So a lot of things that are involved that come together to make a mobile app. So don't underestimate that. There could be a bit of work out there. So we've taken a look at some object-oriented terms. I also have a video I'd like you to watch. I'll post this URL on Blackboard, but it's called Classes and Objects. It's a little video we put together. So we'll take a look at that. Our next and likely final recording will be a little bit on how to make an icon. So we'll catch you for that. And then that should wrap us up. Thank you.